So what if the end of the world, like the apocalypse that everyone has been absolutely terrified of for thousands of years,
Mhm.
what if it isn't actually the end of the physical world at all?
Right. Which is a wild thought to start with.
I mean, it really is. What if, instead of this magical destruction of the planet where the sky falls, we're actually looking at the universe hitting, Control-Alt-Delete on a corrupt global economy?
Yeah, it completely shatters how we are conditioned to view history, doesn't it?
Totally.
When you shift from a mythological worldview to a systems engineering worldview, the entire narrative flips. I mean, you go from a story about a terrifying arbitrary punishment to a brilliant mechanical thesis on evolutionary social
And
physics.
that is exactly what we were getting into today. So if you were joining us for this deep dive, you might be expecting a traditional, maybe even sentimental, theological discussion about ancient texts.
Oh, we are definitely not doing that.
No, we are absolutely not. We are about to completely rewire how you look at this stuff. We're diving into the grand finale of a specific ancient source, the closing arguments of Surah Al-Anbiya.
Right, versus 103 to the end.
Exactly. And we are going to look at it through a lens that might genuinely shock you. Because traditionally, I mean, humanity has papered over these ancient texts with some incredibly vivid cinematic folklore.
Yeah, and it's easy to see why, ancient humanity often used these physicalized allegories to describe complex systemic realities.
Right, because they didn't have the vocabulary.
Exactly. They simply didn't have the modern vocabulary of thermodynamics or like systems architecture. But when you look past the folklore, the rigorous physics are entirely there.
So let's actually set the stage with that mythology first, just to show what we are dismantling here.
Yeah.
Because if you grew up with these texts, or even if you've just absorbed cultural osmosis from, apocalyptic blockbuster movies, you know the imagery.
Oh, yeah, the Hollywood version.
The full Hollywood version. We're talking about angels physically rolling up a literal blue canvas sky like it's a living room carpet.
Right.
We've got apocalyptic trumpet blasts paralyzing billions of people with sheer terror.
Right.
And then, like, the grand finale is a literal magical kingdom being handed over to a specific favorite religious group while the rest of the physical universe just burns to ash.
Yeah, it's a tearjerker. It's meant to provoke fear,
Exactly.
which is, to be absolutely blunt, a primitive comic book style placeholder.
Wow. Comic book style placeholder.
That's really what it is. It is a mythological setup that completely obscures what is actually happening in the text. I mean, this isn't a supernatural horror movie. The text is laying down the absolute ironclad law of planetary succession.
Planetary succession. Okay. Define that for us.
Yeah.
Because that sounds like something out of a political science seminar, not an ancient scripture.
Well, it is exactly that. It's a mathematical guarantee being presented to you. Basically, when old, corrupt, high-entropy paradigms finally burn themselves out, and mathematically they always do highly disciplined, constructive workers will take full title to the planet's infrastructure.
So it's not the physical universe ending.
Not at all. It is about the operational blueprint for how a bloated, failing societal system is forcibly reset by the mechanics of the universe.
Let me stop you right there, because applying modern concepts like thermodynamics and systems architecture to an ancient text feels like a massive leap.
I get that. It sounds anachronistic at first.
Right. Aren't we just projecting modern systems theory backwards? Like, how do we logically justify reading an apocalypse as a socioeconomic reset?
We justify it by looking at the raw structural data of the language itself. We have to, strip away centuries of sentimental translation and look at what the words actually mean.
Okay, let's do the linguistic deep dive then.
Right, so there's a specific phrase in the cosmology of this text that traditionalists read as a giant magical scroll in the sky being physically rolled up by angels. The Arabic phrase is Yahweh sama katai sijili l-kutub.
Okay, yeah. Rolling up the heavens like a scroll for writings. That's the standard translation, right?
Exactly.
So if the text literally says rolling up, how is that not a physical event?
Because of the precise definitions of the words te and sigil, let's look at te first. In the context of the source material, it does not mean folding a piece of paper in half to put it in an envelope.
Okay, what does it mean then?
It signifies a structural phase transition.
A phase transition, like water turning into steam.
Exactly like that. In physics, a phase transition is when a system reaches a specific threshold of temperature or pressure and its fundamental structure changes.
Right. It can't maintain its current state anymore.
Precisely. In a sociological or historical context, te means compressing, concluding, or rolling up an operational cycle. It means a specific era of human history has reached its structural limit and is changing state.
Okay, so the rolling up is the conclusion of an era. But what about the scroll, the sigil,
Well, a sigil is not just a blank piece of parchment. It is a data ledger.
like an accounting book?
Exactly. It's a record of accounts, an administrative registry. So if we put those two precise definitions together, what is the systems translation?
You're saying it's about systems reaching their limits.
Yes. The text is stating that human history runs on definitive programmatic cycles. When an era's data ledger, its economic systems, its political frameworks, its legal codes becomes hopelessly bloated with systemic contradictions, exploitation, and friction.
The universe doesn't just let it limp on forever.
Exactly. It executes a total architectural reboot.
Man, that is fascinating. So it executes a te on the sigil.
Yes, it compresses that old, corrupted data to make way for a new cycle.
I really want to ground this for you listening because this is where the theory becomes incredibly real. Think of this exactly like a bloated, failing operating system on your laptop.
That's the perfect analogy.
You know the feeling, right?
Okay.
You've downloaded too many conflicting programs. The registry is an absolute mess. There are these background processes constantly siphoning off your memory.
And the fan is just spinning wildly.
Yes, generating tons of heat, but the computer's barely moving. Eventually, the screen just freezes. You can't just tweak a setting in the control panel to fix it. The system crashes.
Right, it requires a hard reset.
A clean install from the factory settings to function again. That's what we were talking about here on a civilizational level.
That analogy is so spot on because the text immediately follows up the rolling of the ledger with the concept of the singularity reset. It explicitly says, as we began the first creation, we will repeat it.
Okay, the Arabic there is kama badana awala kalkinui, right?
Exactly. Now, traditional interpretations read that as God doing a magic trick twice, like creating the physical universe from nothing, destroying it, and then poof, creating it again out of nowhere.
But in the systems framework we're building today, what does returning to the first creation actually mean?
It is pure thermodynamics applied to historical eras. Think about the baseline singularity of any system, including human society. In its earliest, most constructive phases, what the source refers to as the original baseline, a system is optimized.
Because humanity wasn't originally divided into these hyper-extractive classes.
Right, there is less systemic friction. But over time, as societies grow, if they base their growth on exploitation, say, a small elite extracting resources from a massive working class, they accumulate systemic debt.
Wait, okay, thermodynamics is about heat and energy in physics. How does a corrupt politician or, like, a bad tax policy literally create thermodynamic entropy in a society?
It's a brilliant question, because human energy is energy.
I mean, literally calories and labor.
Exactly. Think about the sheer amount of physical and psychological energy a society wastes just to maintain an oppressive structure. If you have an empire where 1% of the population hoards all the wealth, that system is inherently unstable.
It constantly wants to fall apart.
Right. So how do they keep it together? They have to spend massive amounts of energy. They build massive police states. They fund enormous propaganda machines.
Just to keep people from realizing they're being robbed.
Exactly. They create complex, bloated bureaucracies just to manage the inequality. All of that is wasted energy. It's friction.
So instead of that energy going toward human development or scientific discovery or building sustainable infrastructure, it's just being burned to keep the corrupt system from collapsing on itself.
Yes. And in physics, friction generates heat. And eventually, if it's not released, the machine breaks down. Entropy increases.
The crash is inevitable.
The rolling up of the ledger is the universe finally saying, the friction in the societal engine has reached critical mass. The universe is incredibly efficient, It will not tolerate infinite waste. So it compresses that high-entropy corrupted data to relaunch a clean, optimized system from the original baseline singularity. The universe demanding efficiency and balance.
This completely changes the narrative. Because if the apocalypse is actually a systemic reboot of a failed civilization, what happens to the concepts of heaven and hell?
Right, that's the big question.
Because the imagery of hellfire and heavenly gardens is so deeply baked into the traditional reading of this text. If there's no magical kingdom in the sky and no literal pit of fire, what are they?
Well, we have to completely redefine the afterlife as presented in this specific analytical framework. The source material explains the text's view of heaven and hell not as static physical locations you are magically banished to, but as evolutionary stages.
Evolutionary stages.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack that. What is hell in this framework? I mean, how do you have hell without physical fire?
Remember what we just said about friction and heat? Hell is a state of severe stagnation. It is maximum entropy. It is the psychological and sociological terror where human potential is entirely frozen.
So it's an evolutionary dead end.
Exactly. When a society or an individual operates against the natural laws of balance and justice, they create immense internal and external friction. Hell is living inside that friction.
So if we go back to the computer analogy, hell is the psychological state of being trapped inside that bloated, failing operating system right as it's crashing.
Yes, you are burning up energy just to stay still. You are in a state of constant anxiety, decay, and conflict. Think about living in the dying days of a corrupt empire.
Oh man, yeah, the infrastructure's crumbling, the currency is hyperinflating.
Right, everyone is fighting for scraps, and the elite are doubling down on oppression to squeeze out the last bits of wealth. That societal reality is hell. It is the literal manifestation of fire and friction.
That is terrifyingly relatable to a lot of human history. So what about heaven then? If hell is endless friction, is heaven just an infinite upgrade loop? Because honestly, endless growth also sounds kind of exhausting.
Well, it's not exhausting because it's effortless. Heaven is the exact opposite of that friction. It is continuous, unfettered growth. It's a state where an individual's or a society's desires perfectly align with the natural laws of the universe.
Okay, so it's frictionless.
Exactly. The text uses a phrase that essentially translates to, they will abide in whatever their souls desire. But in a systems context, this doesn't mean a magical genie granting wishes. It means there is zero friction in actualizing your potential.
Because your desires are no longer parasitic.
Right. In the failing system, if I want to get extremely wealthy, I usually have to extract that wealth from someone else. My desire creates friction for you.
I lose so you can win.
Exactly. But in an optimized system, your desires are constructive. Because they aren't exploitative, the universe actively facilitates your growth. It's a state of perfect systemic harmony where evolution accelerates. The environment supports you rather than fights you.
Okay, so that brings us to this really intense concept of the Great Terror. The text explicitly claims that during this massive societal reboot, there is a great terror. The Arabic is al-Faza al-Akbar, right?
Yes, the Great Terror.
But it says that this terror will not cause the constructive individuals any grief or anxiety. Now, I have to push back here.
Go for it.
If society is collapsing, if the economy is crashing and the political systems are burning down, how can anyone not feel terror? Are we talking about surviving a literal disaster in a bunker, or is this about psychological resilience?
What's fascinating here is how the source material connects this lack of fear to the fully developed integrated self. The Arabic term used is the mu'min.
Which is usually just translated as a believer.
Right, traditionally it's a believer. But this isn't just someone who holds a specific set of theological beliefs in their head while the world burns. It's an individual whose intellect and actions are totally aligned with the universe's evolutionary physics. To explain this resilience, the source references the philosopher-poet Iqbal.
Oh, I love the philosophical angle here. What does Iqbal say about surviving the crash?
Iqbal asks a brilliant question. He says, "What is the sign of a true believer? When death comes, there is a smile on their lips."
Wow.
Now, why would someone smile at death or at a macro-historical collapse? It's because an integrated intellect doesn't fear systemic transitions. It doesn't even fear death in the traditional sense because it sees these events merely as the next evolutionary stage.
I see what you're saying. The analogy this source uses for this is really striking. It says it's like a drop of water eagerly becoming a pearl in an oyster, rather than being terrified of losing its identity as a mere drop.
That's the core of it right there. Think about where your identity is anchored. If your entire identity, your wealth, your status, and your worldview are tied up in the corrupt, bloated operating system.
Which a lot of people's are.
Exactly. If you are one of the exploitative classes, or if you've anchored your worth to a high-entropy paradigm, then a system reset is absolutely terrifying. It is the great terror because everything you value, everything that makes you you, is being rolled up and deleted.
You are the corrupted data being purged.
Yes. But if you are aligned with constructive growth, if you are the moment, you see the crash not as an end, but as the necessary clearing of the cache so the optimized system can finally launch.
So you welcome the transition.
You welcome it because you are built for the next phase. You aren't losing anything, you are graduating.
That is profound.
Yeah.
It shifts the entire emotional register of the text from this, like, paralyzing fear of the apocalypse to a profound operational optimism.
It's an incredibly empowering framework.
But it makes me wonder, if the universe is ruthlessly rebooting these failing systems, what is the ultimate goal of the blueprint? Like, what exactly are we rebooting towards?
That's the logical next step.
If it's not a magical kingdom in the sky, what is the end state on Earth?
That brings us to the title of the blueprint itself, which is stated very clearly in the text. The phrase is Rahmatan lil alamin.
Now, this is usually translated as a mercy to the worlds. But knowing what we know now about the physics of this text, I have a challenge here.
Let's hear it.
How do we break this phrase out of that emotional, sentimental rhetoric? Because mercy usually implies, a king sitting on a throne, looking down at a guilty prisoner, and arbitrarily deciding not to execute them. It feels emotional. It feels entirely subjective.
And that sentimental reading completely defames the operational power of the text. It turns a cosmic law into a feeling.
Right. So what is the systemic reading?
To understand it, we have to look at the etymology. The root of the word Rama is deeply biologically connected to the word for womb. Yes. Now think about what a womb actually is in biology. It is not a warm, fuzzy feeling of forgiveness.
No, it's an incredibly complex biological mechanism. It's like an incubator.
Exactly. It is an active, protective, and highly structured environment. Its entire purpose is to perfectly nourish a developing organism. It shields that organism from external shocks.
It provides exactly what it needs.
Yes. It provides meticulously calibrated nutritional inputs. It filters out toxins. It does all of this so that the organism can reach its full evolutionary potential before it is born into the wider world.
So Rama is not mercy.
No. It is a systemic sustenance matrix. It is engineered growth.
Let me make sure I'm grasping the scale of this. You're calling it a systemic sustenance matrix. That sounds like something out of the Matrix movies. Are we talking about a literal physical structure here or a set of laws?
We are talking about a socioeconomic and political architecture. If a society adopts this blueprint, it acts as a womb for human potential. Every single person in that society is guaranteed their basic sustenance, their security, and the environment they need to develop their intellect and capabilities without having to exploit someone else to get it.
And the second part of the phrase, lil alamin, usually translated as for all the worlds or all domains.
This is the critical proof that the message of this text is not a localized tribal religious doctrine.
Right, it's not just for one group.
Exactly. It is not a set of rules just for one specific demographic living in the desert thousands of years ago, meant to make them feel superior to their neighbors. It is a universal, cross-domain blueprint.
Because thermodynamics doesn't care about your tribe.
Exactly. The goal of the universal reboot is to establish a global matrix engineered to eliminate economic friction and geopolitical exploitation and maximize human development regardless of race, geography, or tribal identity.
It's the physics of universal nourishment.
It's an open-source blueprint for the entire planet designed to stop the rich from eating the poor.
Okay, but to achieve this global sustenance matrix, to actually build this societal incubator, the blueprint demands total integration. It requires everyone to get on the same page, which introduces a massive problem.
Because humans love to divide themselves.
Exactly. We love our factions. So how does the text deal with that? Let's look at the logical ultimatum it delivers in verse 108. It states, "Your absolute sovereign center is a singular unified law, so will you finally submit your intellect to this reality?"
Right.
The Arabic phrase here is, "Fahal antum muslimun."
This is the final, devastating blow to all fractured human-made systems of authority. Throughout history, humanity has constantly tried to run its societies on fractured paradigms.
We really have.
We divide ourselves into competing nationalisms. We invent racial, tribal hierarchies. We create exclusive clerical dogmas that say, our group is saved, your group is damned. The text is exposing the utter intellectual bankruptcy of that approach.
Because if the universe is one unified system, if gravity works the same in Tokyo as it does in New York, then running a global society on division is literally defying the laws of physics.
Precisely. The concept used here is ilahun wahid. traditionally translated as singular God, but in this systemic context, it means a singular unified law.
A unified law of operations.
Yes. It dictates that the universe operates on a single set of unyielding thermodynamic and moral physics. If you ignore this unified physics, you are running your society on an unproven assertion.
Give me an example of an unproven assertion in this context. I want to make this super concrete for the listener.
Okay, an unproven assertion would be something like, our nation is inherently superior to your nation, therefore we have the right to extract your resources. Or, the working class is naturally less intelligent than the ruling class, so it's fine if they starve.
Wow. Okay, yeah.
These are unproven assertions. They are societal bugs. They do not align with the baseline singularity of the universe. If you build a society on these bugs, you are building an airplane that ignores the laws of aerodynamics.
It might roll down the runway for a while.
But it is mathematically bound to crash. It will create friction, it will heat up, and it will eventually be rolled up in the ledger.
That drastically reframes the word Islam entirely in this context, because the phrase was fahal antum muslimun. Islam is usually translated directly into English as submission, which honestly sounds incredibly passive.
It does.
It sounds like giving up, like raising a white flag to a dictator.
And that is a tragic mistranslation of the concept's operational reality. In this framework, Islam is not ritualistic compliance. It is not passive submission to an arbitrary king.
What is it then?
It is absolute intellectual integration into this unified cosmic framework.
It's like submitting your code to the master branch.
Exactly. That's brilliant. It's recognizing the unified law of the universe and aligning your societal architecture to it. It's the ultimate application of reason.
So it's active, not passive.
Extremely active. When the text asks, Fahal antum muslimun, it is essentially asking, will you finally stop trying to fight the operational laws of the universe? Will you integrate your systems to run efficiently? Or will you keep burning yourselves out on unproven tribal assertions?
Man, that is powerful. So let's bring this down to the ground. Let's talk about the actual people. If the universe demands a unified law and it ruthlessly reboots systems that defy it, who actually wins in the end?
The inheritance.
Right. Who gets to run the planet when the dust settles from the reboot?
This is where we hit what the source material considers the crown jewel axiom of social physics, the absolute law of inheritance.
Okay, the phrase in verse 105 is, Ana larda yarithuha ibadiya salihun, usually translated as, the earth shall be inherited by the righteous servants. Now, I have to push back hard here.
I figured you would.
Because we have been conditioned for centuries by almost every major religious tradition to believe that righteous means the meek, the impoverished, the people who turn the other cheek.
The passive ascetics.
Exactly. The people who just pray quietly in a corner, suffer in silence, and wait for their magical reward after they die. Is that what Salheen means here? Are the meek inheriting the earth?
Absolutely. Unequivocally not. The source text brutally, analytically critiques that exact idea.
Really? Why? Because blessed are the meek is a pretty foundational concept for billions of people.
Because that entire concept, the idea that poverty, weakness, or helplessness equates to closeness to the divine, is a manipulative, engineered myth.
Whoa. Engineered by who?
By oppressive, extractive oligarchies. It is a psychological weapon that has been utilized for millennia to keep the masses docile.
Wow. So it's essentially systemic gaslighting. The elite say, stay weak, stay poor, it's actually really good for your soul, while they themselves hoard all the physical resources and operational power.
Exactly. If you can convince the exploited class that their suffering makes them holy, they won't revolt. They won't demand a fair share of the ledger. They won't try to change the system.
They will just accept the friction and wait for death.
Right. But let's analyze the Arabic root of the word used here. Salihun. The root is salu. It does not mean meek. It does not mean passive or weak.
What does it mean?
It means structural integrity. It means robust capability, balance, and constructive power. A salik is an engineer. It is someone who fixes things, who builds sustainable systems, who restores balance where there is friction.
So the law of planetary inheritance isn't about the universe feeling sorry for the most submissive people and giving them a reward. It's about macroevolution.
It is the ultimate law of requital in action. It's Darwinian logic applied to societal systems. Think about it systemically. Parasitical, extractive oligarchies bleed energy.
Because of the police states and propaganda we talked about earlier.
Yes, they require massive amounts of force just to maintain their imbalance. They create immense systemic friction. Because of this, they're mathematically guaranteed to self-destruct. They literally burn themselves out.
The bloated OS crashes because it overheats.
Right. But the Salihun, The righteous, the constructive workers, the structural engineers, they are the human assets who execute constructive, sustainable labor. They conserve energy because their systems are just and balanced.
They don't need a massive police state to enforce a fair economic transaction.
No, they don't. They don't need propaganda to convince people a system is fair when it actually is fair. They align with natural law. Therefore, history acts as an automatic, ruthless filter.
Filtering out the parasites.
Over long timelines, the universe filters out the parasites because they are unsustainable, guaranteeing long-term planetary inheritance strictly to the builders and the balancers.
They inherit the Earth not as a magical gift from the sky, but because they're the only ones left who actually know how to run the infrastructure without blowing it up.
Precisely. They have the structural integrity to maintain the system. The parasites inevitably kill the host, and then they die themselves. The builders survive because they nourish the host.
But wait, let's play devil's advocate here, because we have to look at the historical mechanics of this.
Sure.
The builders inherit the Earth. That sounds logically sound in theory, but in reality, corrupt systems, parasitical oligarchies, they don't just look at the math, realize they are thermodynamically inefficient, and hand over the keys politely.
Of course not.
They have standing armies, they have generational wealth, they have surveillance states. How is this transition actually enforced? If the Salahuns are just building things, don't they just get crushed by the people with the tanks?
That is the crucial reality check, and the source material addresses it head-on. It doesn't rely on naive pacifism. To understand how the transition happens, we have to integrate a concept from another part of the broader source framework.
Which part?
Specifically Surah Al-Hadid, which translates to the chapter of iron. You cannot establish justice, what the text calls mizan, or balance purely through philosophical debate or passive wishing.
Because the parasite won't let go of the host just because you explain the math to them.
Exactly. The blueprint for the balanced society, which the text calls the book, representing the intellectual, moral, and economic framework, requires operational power to dismantle oppressive structures.
Okay, so where does the power come from?
That operational power is symbolized by iron,
Mm.
by the sword. The source makes a profound synthetic statement. The sword and the Quran protect each other.
That sounds intense. A lot of people might hear that and think it sounds like endorsing violence. How do they protect each other in a systems framework?
Think of it as the necessary synthesis of ideology and physical capability. Power without an ideological blueprint is sheer tyranny. If you just have iron, you just have military might. Without a balanced economic and moral framework, you are Genghis Khan.
You are just destroying and subjugating, creating more friction. You become the new parasite.
Exactly.
But on the flip side,
A blueprint without the power to enforce it is just a helpless, empty sermon. It's a brilliant think tank paper gathering dust on a shelf while people continue to starve in the streets. True succession, true planetary inheritance requires both. It requires the intellectual blueprint of absolute justice and the physical, operational, economic, and defensive capacity to protect that justice from those who seek to exploit it.
the source brings in a great historical validation for this, and it radically reframes a story we've all heard a million times. Moses and Pharaoh.
Yes, this is a perfect example.
Traditionally, we view this as a purely religious showdown, magic staffs and plagues. But through the systems lens, it's totally different. Moses couldn't just walk into Pharaoh's court, deliver a PowerPoint presentation on human rights and economic fairness, and expect Pharaoh to just surrender.
You know what, Moses? You make a solid thermodynamic argument. I'll free the slaves. No, it doesn't work that way.
Right, because Pharaoh wasn't just a bad guy. He represented a deeply entrenched, extractive economic system.
He sat at the top of a pyramid scheme that relied entirely on slave labor to function. Moses had to build an independent power base.
He had to organize his people.
Yeah. He had to extract them from the oppressive system and create a parallel structure in the wilderness. He had to build the operational capacity, the iron, to eventually possess the power to defend itself and establish its own balanced society. You have to build the capability to withstand the immense friction of the failing system pushing back against you.
Okay, let's fast forward through history. Let's say the builders do it. They gather the iron, they protect the book, they dismantle the parasitical systems. What happens when this actually works?
When it's actualized.
Yeah, when this unified, balanced system, driven by the constructive workers, actually takes hold in human history. Does the text give us a glimpse of the end state, or is it purely theoretical?
It's not theoretical at all. The source material points to a very specific historical moment to illustrate what this looks like when actualized. The Prophet's final Hajj, the farewell pilgrimage.
The source quotes a really striking phrase from that moment. Time has rotated back to its original state?
Yes.
Now, on the surface, that sounds incredibly poetic, like something you'd read in a fantasy novel. But based on everything we've discussed today about phase transitions and resetting ledgers, I'm guessing it's not just poetry.
It's not poetry, it is a definitive systems status report. When it was declared that time has rotated back to its original state, it signified that a massive macro-historical cycle had finally completed its loop.
The reboot was complete.
Humanity, within that specific geographic and societal matrix at that time, had successfully executed the Tay. They had rolled up the corrupted ledger. They had temporarily returned to the baseline singularity.
They successfully completed the clean install of the factory setting.
Yes. It was a unified classless state. It was a society momentarily free of the exploitative economic structures, the hoarding of wealth, and the tribal divisions that had plagued it for centuries.
And the source refers to it as the lost paradise regained.
But not a paradise in the sky, a paradise on Earth, achieved through human labor and structural integrity. It was a manifestation of society exactly as it was originally designed to function optimally, before human-made, unproven assertions and parasitic divisions fractured it.
So it was proof of concept.
Exactly. It proved that the blueprint works. It proved that the Rama, the universal incubator of sustenance, can be actualized in real time if a society aligns its intellect with the laws of the universe.
Which brings us to the grand finale conclusion of the Surah. And honestly, the perfect conclusion for this entire deep dive. Let's look at the final balance sheet in verses 110 through 112.
The ultimate wrap-up.
We're looking at the very final words of the text here. It states that the universe is intimately tracking both the overt public propaganda and the hidden economic secrets of the elite. The Arabic phrase is "Yalamul jara min al-kwali wa yalamu maktaktumun."
He knows what is spoken aloud and he knows what you hide.
Exactly. This raises a massive, eternally relevant question about how we view reality versus public relations.
Oh, absolutely. Human societies, especially extractive ones, are incredibly adept at masking systemic rot with overt propaganda. When an empire is failing, the elites don't go on television and say, "Hey everyone, we are mathematically bound to crash because we are stealing all your energy."
No, they hire PR firms.
Exactly. Extractive systems will always have spokespeople, politicians, and media claiming that the economy is booming, that the system is fair, that the poor are just lazy and need to work harder.
That is the Jara Mil Equali, the loud public speech.
Right. The overt propaganda designed to convince the host that the parasite is actually helping them.
But the universe doesn't watch the news.
No, it does not.
The universe is tracking the hidden ledgers, the mataktuman, what they hide.
The universe does not care about a political speech. It operates on the ultimate thermodynamic balance sheet. It measures the actual friction on the ground.
The real human cost.
It measures the actual exploitation, the hidden extraction of energy from the working class to the parasite class, the secret hoarding of resources. The final verdict is left to the ultimate balance sheet of reality. It's an airtight closing statement for the entire text.
It really is. It's essentially saying you can gaslight the public. You can control the media. You can manipulate the markets. But you cannot gaslight physics.
That is the ultimate takeaway right there. The universe isn't gaslit by PR campaigns or political spin. The ledgers are wide open to the mathematics of reality. The physics of justice are absolute.
There's no escaping it.
None. The expiration date on corruption isn't a vague theological threat about an angry deity. It is a mathematical certainty. When the friction becomes too high, the system will overheat, the scroll will be rolled up, the reset will happen, and the builders will inherit the resulting infrastructure.
Man. So we started this deep dive talking about the apocalypse, the terrifying mythological end of the world. But what these ancient texts are actually providing is the ultimate diagnostic X-ray of societal collapse and renewal. The scary, jagged white line on that X-ray isn't a magical trumpet blast or an angry angel. It's the systemic debt and friction that guarantees a corrupt system's demise.
And the cure isn't a magical intervention from the sky either. It's the disciplined, constructive work of the Salheen, the structural engineers, integrating their intellect with the unified laws of the universe to build a system that actually nourishes human potential instead of feeding off it.
Which leaves you, listening right now, with a massive question to ponder as we wrap this up. If the universe is keeping a continuous thermodynamic ledger of every single system we build, constantly weighing the energy of our overt public claims against the cold, hard reality of our hidden actions and structural inequalities you have to ask yourself.
You really do.
Look around at the world today. Is the system you are participating in right now, the economy you work in, the social structures you uphold, conserving energy through constructive balance? Or is it bleeding out, accumulating fatal friction, just waiting to be rolled up and replaced by the builders?
It's a question of where you want to be when the phase transition happens. Are you the corrupted data, or are you the optimized code ready for the next cycle?
A completely paradigm-shifting way to look at history and our future. We'll leave you two on that.